It is 3/15 of 2015. We continue with Alexander Kojeve in the third section, third topic of his phenomenology of right. We've moved from notion through sphere, and now we're into the section on evolution. We looked at the master-slave parable as the first lesson in this section on the evolution of right. And now he wants to discuss the actual construction of the sign model. And he, interestingly enough, designates the construction of the sign model at the Dakunta threshold, the dialogue threshold, as a matter of forming an existential contract, an ontological and existential contract, or to use his language, an anthropogenic contract. A contract for what it means to be human. A contract for what it means to be just and to live and promote a society that is just and fair and equal. So it's going to be a discussion of the doctrine of right as contract, but it's going to deal with that dialogue threshold where we gather to begin positing that character C universality of consciousness that wants to look for and identify the universal signs that will make up a sign model. So we'll begin with the first moment, which is going to be the forming the ideal of the juridical contract of equality. There are 5 moments at the Dakunta threshold of dialogue. And the first is mutual consent. Both A and B risk their lives freely and consciously in order to determine the notion of the true, from the dialogue interaction that they are involved in. This inaugurates the pursuit of justice. And therefore it is a mutual consent between A and B of the possibility of attaining a universality of justice. The dialogue is based on a feeling of an ethical imperative. There's a feeling that this is a necessity, and the self takes on the idea of being a duty, being self. Now third, the dialogue interaction becomes an exchange of mutual exclusion because the annihilation of the one by the other will occur as the universality is tested through the dialogue. So both of their consents to action become A and B being involved in a mutual risk. Remember, we risk our self-preservation by risking the going out of ourselves and positing a universal truth. It's only by those individuals who are willing to get involved in shaping a just society, that are willing to risk their own lives and risk their own self-identity and self-enclosure. So A and B take up this mutual risk for truth. So the dialogue interaction becomes a quest for a juridical contract of truth, according to Kojeve. They want to draw up a contract of agreement. How can they both agree on a universal truth that they will form through acquiring and identifying the universal signs that will make up the truth sign model? So the first moment is the basic contract of truth, the contract of a mutual desire and intent, a mutual intention to reach a universality of truth as a sign model. Now we get into the actual construction of the sign model. That's going to be moment 2. And it's going to be the forming of the contract agreement as an equivalence sign model. So equivalence deals with that which is going to be posited in the historical reality, remember. Equality is the ideal, but equivalence is the ideal as incarnate. So now we move out of the equality of the ideal in moment 1 to the equivalence of an incarnate ideal as the equivalence sign model. There are 6 moments to forming this contract of signs, this agreement of a sign model. A and B consent to the possibility, first of all, of just even being able to form justice as a sign. And that's what constitutes the birth of character C, which is really a shared sign consciousness, which is going to become the shared dimension of universality that will evolve within this dialogue at the Dakunta threshold of dialogue. So character C becomes consciousness of the third as truth. A and B are agents 1 and 2. Agent 3, or the third, is this character C of universality, and that character is the posited consciousness of a sign model universality of consciousness. So the consenting equality of agents seek to form a subjective sign of justice, a subjective construction between the two of them in interaction and dialogue that can be posited as a consciousness of universality. So the resultant sign model is hinged, because remember, we want to go out of ourselves after we construct the ideal. The second moment is all about going out of the self, is positing. And so the fifth moment of the construction of the sign model is actually the taking the sign model and hinging it to the realm of positing as that which can be an internal externality that is objectively observable. Now, how could it be objectively observable? Well, it could be observed as an eschatological reality, not the current reality. It's that which is to inform reality with its directional sense. So it is viewed as observable through the filter of an eschatology, an eschatological outlook. So the sixth moment, now the concept of slave evolves, because that's going to speak to that axis flip, where the self transitions out of the enclosed ideal self and wants to go out into society and posit this directional sense of universality. And so the axis flip takes place where form and content for positing are generated. So now we're going to get very specific and form the equivalence positing out of the equality ideal. The content will be the acquired sign model. As Kojeve says, it becomes a possessed property of justice. And the form is relational, of course, because it's going to be a life-generative relation of master-slave in a contractual agreement of the ideal related to the posited praxis. And that praxis, of course, is the praxis of positing to reach recognition. So it becomes a praxis duty for recognition. So we move from the ideal contract of equality, which is a traditional contract that says, yes, it is possible to reach a sign model. And then we move through the second moment of actually taking equality and making it incarnate equivalence, and we construct the equivalence sign model, and that brings about an actuality in our society, in our history. And so the third moment is going to be remember the concrete is the citizen self, the contract is citizen. The generative master-slave contract creates the synthesis of equality and equivalence, the ideal and the incarnation, which is arrived at gradually through time. This might take several loops of positing and return. It's arrived at gradually through time, and each loop does generate a return of right. So the return of right is embodied in this consciousness of the third, of the universal consciousness that is posited. It's a consciousness that takes up all the roles of the legislator of the praxis ideal, the judge of that which is universal, and the enforcer which desires to enact it through application. This third consciousness does make note of conformity and nonconformity during the work of application. So remember, actuality comes about by work, the work of actually applying this ideal sign model. When that happens, the return of right isn't a passive event. We talked about this before. Return is always an active gathering. Well, if it's an active gathering, then it has to be an evaluative gathering, which evaluates conformity and nonconformity of the work of application. And the evaluative principle for Kojeve is called the principle of equity. So we can talk about this third moment of actually being the anthropogenic duty of negation. Because it is going to be a negation of that tendency, that very basic human tendency to preserve ourselves and not risk ourselves by entering into new truth. So it is a continual negation of all that is unequal, and in this way justice becomes right, and the character C consciousness becomes a witness for recognition that through measuring the conformity and the nonconformity gathers up the recognition that can return back to the master, who was the combatant, but with that which is recognized as truly an aspect of humanity, of universal humanity. So that which is affirmed is that which is socially just, that which promotes a humanity of equality, a humanity of justice. And when those aspects of the positing become revealed, then the return can be returned through this universal character C to the ideal contract of equality that can again be reincarnated as a equivalence sign model. So basically, Kojeve has taken us through the ideality of the contract of equality as that which is a mutual consent. It's a mutual intention of Agent A and Agent B. They're both determined to reach a truth as sign, justice as sign, as a possibility. They take it up as a possibility that can be achieved. The actual working out of that possibility results in forming a sign model, which becomes an equivalence sign model, where all elements of the sign model are balanced as an equivalence. No particular dimension of the sign model is prejudiced against another aspect of the sign model. It is an equivalence sign model. Then those two can be combined together in the work of negation and defining value, and that universal consciousness becomes the witness for recognition that actively gathers in the return. And as Hegel would say, and as Kojeve most certainly says, it is a slow evolutionary type process through the dimension of space and time. It's an ongoing loop of ideal incarnation, return, ideal incarnation, return. The ideal of equality, the incarnation of equivalence, the return of the right, and then back again to the revised equality of the ideal, the revised new model of equivalence that makes it incarnate, and then again new conformity and new nonconformity, and the loop will continue. So, interesting way to take this up, but I've never heard of any thinker describing the Kunta threshold and the construction of the sign model as a contract, but Kojeve does want to describe our model construction as actually an agreed upon contract of signs. So it is actually an agreement. He's emphasizing the aspect of intersubjective agreement here, so it is the agreement formation of the sign model that becomes applied to society. And that wraps up through page 229.